defeatist attitude is completely disconnected from what 21st century science is telling us. And we should be going after that like a bear.
So now I'm going to discuss those studies. So as Laura said, if you can get the science into the hands of the general population, they will invent wise actions. And so being housed at Prevent Child Abuse Georgia in the Center for Healthy Development at Georgia State University, we're always thinking about all of this research going on here. How can we actually get it out so people know? Because we believe if they knew, they would really care and hopefully change systems and how we practice. So by learning the science, each community can invest in the future generations to help come up with solutions as well that are custom to them. So to summarize the background of the ACEs, the kind of pinnacle studies that were done a while ago between 1995 and 1997 were done by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and also Kaiser Permanente. And they looked at the impact of childhood trauma and the patient's ability to quit smoking or lose weight. So early childhood trauma and these other health outcomes as adults. So they were looking at over 17,000 individuals receiving physical exams, and they also completed confidential surveys regarding their childhood experiences and their current health status. The participants were groups of mostly educated, they were white, and employed citizens. So that to me seems like kind of an insulated layer. They had insurance. For those at Kaiser Permanente, they had jobs. So we should assume their health status is maybe better than populations that don't have that as well. And so going into that, they found that many people did have ACEs. And this study has been replicated in many different populations and cultures and has found the same thing, that these early adversities are linked to later poor health outcomes as adults and can impact them throughout a lifespan. The next one. And so on the screen here, you can kind of see what makes up the official ACEs, what was included in that study and most of the studies going forward. So within there, they're looking at 10 specific things of childhood adversity, so within the household. So 3 of those types are child abuse, 2 of those types are neglect, and the other ones are other household challenges. And the important thing to kind of note about this on the slide are we're asking adults about their experiences as children. So did you experience physical abuse as a child? And then when it comes to those household stress, we're asking them, did you experience when you were a child, a parent having mental illness or a parent using substance abuse or a parent being incarcerated? So those household stresses in there. And when they asked about this in the studies, they found that the majority of them had experienced at least one ACE. So 64% of Americans had experienced at least one early adversity, and more than 1 in 5 reported 3 or more ACEs. So there's an increase in the likelihood of experiencing additional ACEs, especially with an incarcerated family member and domestic violence in the home, that those can be comorbid with other ones in there. Next. And so we know there's more than those just 10 things that were listed on the other slide that cause trauma, cause stress, cause early adversity in the lives of children. Can you guys put in the chat box maybe something that you don't see in that original slide that you guys would consider an early adversity or trauma? And as you guys are writing those in the chat box, some studies have found that these 10 ACEs really only cover about 45% of childhood trauma that occurs. So it's only capturing a small glimpse at it. Instability, moving often, yeah. Violent neighborhoods, so the community factor, not just within our household, which is more about what that ACE study is, but the bigger picture. Racism, absolutely. So those aggressions that you experience on a day-to-day basis can become toxic and build up. Food deserts, yeah, the effect of a pandemic, absolutely. We have started including the pandemic in some of that bigger community and historical events going on. Awesome, so one I didn't see up there would be poverty. which maybe some of these allude to. So the stresses of poverty, especially chronically, things like that. Next slide. And then in looking at Georgia specifically, so remember when we were talking about that initial study, I had said that 64% of Americans had experienced at least one ACE. So how does Georgia stack up? In Georgia, we find that 3 in 5 report experience at least one ACE. So that's about 58%. So a little bit below those original numbers. But again, these are different points in time as well. So the first Georgia ACEs study was done in 2016 by DPH, and I see a couple of you guys on here. So it was the BRIPIS study, which is the, let me get this right, I always mess it up in there. The Brief Risk Factual Surveillance Survey, no, Surveillance System. You guys can tell me how wrong I am in the chat box, but it's the BRIPIS and it's available on DPH's website that you can go to right now. And I'm also gonna put in the chat box a link to a fact sheet that has the most current Georgia data in there on ACEs. Okay. So again, DPH was collecting this from the BRIPIS survey in 2016 and 2018. It's a phone-based survey that they conducted, and it was with non-institutionalized adults, so people not incarcerated currently over the age of 18. And the combined data mostly models the outcome of that national study. So the combined sample was close to 12,000 Georgians, so that's a fairly good sample size, and it found that 3 in 5, or 60% of Georgians reported at least one ACE. So that means that 40% of Georgians had no adversities growing up compared to the larger percent who experienced at least one, if not more. I also want to point out that the 1 in 5 reported at least 3 or more ACEs, and we know that there is a dose response. So the more ACEs you have, the more likely you are to experience adversity or poor health outcomes throughout your lifespan. Next slide. And I like this slide because it shows the cascading effect or the trajectory of early childhood experiences. So first starting with that experience in childhood, how that could disrupt your brain development, the trauma, the stress causing with it, impacting social emotional competence, risky behaviors, risky health behaviors, disease, disability, social problems, and that can also lead to early death. And so the number of ACEs a person has and the risk of negative health outcomes are really related in there. Like I mentioned, that dose response that comes out with it. And so some of those negative health outcomes, when we talk about early death, they include, you have an increased risk of smoking, of binge drinking, of reporting poor mental health, but also heart disease, adolescent pregnancy, illicit drug use, and also including poor work performance they had in there as well. And so this is kind of when we see those factors, a lot of our society is geared to only treating the symptoms that we see. So when we see the heart disease, we see these poor, risky health behaviors, how do we treat them? When that's kind of what we see at the top of that iceberg, but backing it up all the way down to the base or foundation of this pyramid at those early adversities, how can we prevent those? So not just how can we treat heart disease or prevent it, but how can we back it up even further to treating something we know to be one of the root causes, these early adversities. And I also wanted to say that those with an ACE score of 6 or higher had an increased risk of dying 20 years earlier than those with no ACEs. So that is a really significant, staggering number to think of, the impact it can have. Next slide. And so childhood trauma can really impact a child's development, as that pyramid just really showed us, and go throughout adulthood. So these little footprints just represent the lifespan and exposure to strong, frequent, or prolonged stress without adult support can disrupt the development of those healthy networks that the brain needs to go out. It is the foundational one. So it's really important to emphasize that these frequent, strong, prolonged stress without the support of protective factors and other things like that. So this toxic stress can take a toll on a child's physical and mental health and last a lifetime. So these experiences and the study has revealed that childhood trauma can also impact them more immediately. So the child's education, their mental health, their physical health, and all of that leading up to them as adults job productivity, other things like that. So trauma is another one of those words that we hear a lot. I think trauma-informed is a big buzzword right now, but it could also be misunderstood to just have one definition or another. And we always want to keep in mind that the definition for trauma is a deeply disturbing or distressing experience. So on one hand, toxic stress can occur when these experiences are long in duration or intensity, or a very traumatic event. And then it also could be personal to you. So everyone experiences it or perceives it differently, what is stressful or distressing to them. And the ACE study only covers a small amount of it. So keep in mind those things that you guys put in the chat box, those bigger things, racism, poverty, the pandemic, food deserts, community violence, things like that when we're thinking trauma or sustained trauma. Next slide. And so thinking of trauma and what we just discussed with those short-term impacts on children, their brain development, mental health, what kind of impact do we think that our children have in schools when they're showing up to learn and participate? If they're experiencing a lot of trauma at home or in their community, are they prepared to learn? Are they learning in the same way? Do we have the same brain connections and synapses going on as children who are not experiencing as much trauma? So what it looks like in the classroom. So we can see on the slide that, potentially failing a grade, and all of those listed there have been from studies that have shown a link between early adversity and then children's performance in schools. So failing a grade, lower scores on standardized tests, having language difficulties, being suspended or even expelled, and those poor health outcomes even as adolescents. So academic failure, attendance problems, as we mentioned, and so on. Next. Sorry, I'm not usually the one saying next. I'm usually the one advancing slides. I think I'm always it. So I appreciate Tiffany stepping in. My Zoom was being slow without it. And so some of the key takeaways of that early section when we're talking about just the issue, we're about to get to the solution, are that ACEs are common and they are cumulative. This is a widespread issue, and that accumulative means they build up. So the more you have, the higher risk are, and so forth. And that nearly 1 in 6 adults reported 4 or more ACEs. So it's not just 1 or 2, but especially those threshold of higher ACEs, 4 or more, 6 or more, that are tied to a lot more health incomes. So that's 1 in 6 adults reporting, 1 in 6 adults reporting 4 or more. It's going to be a lot more of the negative health outcomes that they're associated with. And then lastly, ACEs are associated with negative health behavior and socioeconomic challenges. Next slide. So here is the good news, that ACEs are not a life sentence, a death sentence, a poor health outcome sentence. They definitely are associated, but luckily there's things that we can all do to prevent them, to mitigate them. So positive experiences can buffer those bad ones. So whenever we talk about adverse childhood experiences, it's equally, if not more important, that we're talking about things such as positive experiences and protective factors. So something such as relational wealth. So being connected in a healthy way to social networks. So just one positive and stable relationship can really balance some of those negative things occurring in a child's life and help build resilience in them. And so having more than one, having mentors, having positive influences in their life, studies have shown can really help to have children thrive or push through, bounce back, or prevent those negative experiences taking a toll and prevent it from going on into their adulthood as well. So, excuse me, how can we tip the scales to help children thrive? The little scale we have, so the red one would be the ACEs and the yellow ones being those positive experiences. How do we tip it in their favor? Next slide. And it starts really with all of us taking a little bit of a different approach on there. So not only looking at the child like that tip of the iceberg, seeing that the behaviors that they're doing, maybe an outburst in class, other things like that, just looking behaviorally at them or what's going on. So instead of just asking what's wrong with you or penalizing for what's wrong with you, or our expectation is that there's nothing wrong with you, instead we should be asking people, What has happened to you? What's going on? Is everything okay? So this is kind of getting it to the root of what is trauma informed. So not just looking at the behavior, but looking at what is causing the behavior. So we're responding to the causes of that outcome rather than just responding to the outcome itself, and making our processes and policies in a way that we're not just responding to that behavior. We are equipped to respond to the root cause so we can help prevent or mitigate it from becoming a bigger issue down the road. So instead of what's wrong with you, what's happened to you? Are you okay? What's going on? Getting to the root of it. Next slide. And I'm going to hand it off to Tiffany, who is the Prevention Director at the Georgia Center for Child Advocacy.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, Jill shared a lot about adverse childhood experiences, talking about really the doom and the gloom, but we do, as she talked about, how relationships can be so important. We want to share also the positive piece, that there is hope for children and that those positive experiences are just as important, if not more important, for children who have experienced trauma, or if they don't even experience trauma. So relationships can be so powerful and protective that they can even prevent physical health problems that are more likely to occur in stressful environments, and help us heal from that adversity and trauma. So all of the examples that you see on the slide here were part of a study that demonstrated how supportive maternal caregiving reduced the likelihood of stress-related illnesses, those such as asthma, among children who grew up in homes with domestic violence. So these children are at a much higher risk of being diagnosed with asthma due to the stress that they were experiencing at home. However, these nurturing relationships, so things like helping a child at bedtime, tucking them in, talking with them at mealtime, playing imaginary games, that is the work of children as they are playing, even things like singing songs and giving lots of hugs and affection. Those nurturing relationships can really be game changers, even during tough times. So you can all think about your experiences during the pandemic, which was a really tough time for a lot of individuals, a lot of families, and a lot of children. And so the power of relationships can really help us get through those tough times. Engaged and supportive parenting helps protect children against toxic stress among children growing up in an otherwise similar, environments. Vulnerable families with children whose parents are more supportive, they have fewer emergency room visits, and they have lower biological stress markers, which is pretty significant. There is one story, it's actually an example from a book called The Other Westmore. Some of you may have heard of that, which really provides the example of how supportive relationships can help children thrive. There were two kids, both named Westmore, and they were born several blocks apart from each other within about a year or so of each other. They both grew up in a fatherless home in similar Baltimore neighborhoods, and they both had difficult childhoods. They hung out on the street corners with their crews. They both ran into trouble with the police. But how then did one grow up to be a Rhodes Scholar, a decorated veteran, a White House Fellow, and a business leader, while the other, Westmore, ended up a convicted murderer serving a life sentence? The child who thrived moved with his mother to live with his maternal grandparents, who were very loving and supportive and nurtured that relationship with him. And he was eventually sent to military school, where he was mentored by an older cadet and a teacher. So this shows that just one protective, positive adult influence can make all the difference, allowing a child to identify things like hope and making goals for the future, recognizing their own strengths and not just focusing on those weaknesses, and they're able to thrive. So the Thriving Wes Moore says in his book that he wrote, I love this quote, "The chilling truth is that his story could have been mine, and the tragedy is that my story could have been his. Had it not been for the folks who helped me and ushered me into manhood in the way they did, things would have been very different." So we think about the impact that positive relationships can have on children. Again, two children who grew up in a very similar situation, and they turned out very differently. So it's important to think about those relationships in terms of the children that are in all of your lives, and the positive impact that you can have on them to grow up to be thriving adults. So I want to talk a little bit about resilience. Oh, before we get to resilience, we want to have some discussion. So in the chat, I would love for you all to share with us, as a child, who was an adult that had a positive impact on your life. So think about that story about the other Wes Moore. Who was someone that helped to nurture you into becoming the adult that you are today? So I see Deborah says mom and dad. I saw some church leaders, teachers. Oh, the gifted and talented coordinator at my school. That's excellent. Boys and girls clubs, church members, extension agent. That's great. So I'm seeing, what I love about this is that we're showing a lot of people had, parents that really helped them, but there were a lot of others who had outside individuals that played a significant role on their life. And that shows us that it is really important, obviously, the relationships that we have with our caregivers, but we can also have caregivers outside of the home, and it's important to pay attention to those relationships. In fact, as Jill was talking about the ACEs survey, there is also a resilience survey. And so whenever we're talking about the people wanting to take the ACEs survey, I always say, please take the resilience survey as well, because again, those relationships, those positive impacts that you had early on are more significant than the adversity that you may have experienced. And that resilience survey asks questions like, did you feel loved by your parents when you were growing up? Did you have someone other than a parent to turn to and talk to? And it sounds like a lot of you did have that kind of relationship, which is really wonderful. All right. Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit about resilience. And I'm sure, again, this is a word many people talk about: resilience, that ability to adapt to adversity, to trauma, a tragedy that we have in our life, or just even the everyday stressors that we have. That resilience is that ability to bounce back, and it can help children manage feelings of anxiety, uncertainty, and that stress. But it's important to remember that children are not born resilient. We are born with the capacity to be resilient, but that resilience really has to be built over time, and again, nurtured through those relationships. So thinking to all of the individuals that you put in the chat here that really helped you as you were growing up, think about some of the resilience skills that they may have taught you as you were developing. It may not have been something that they explicitly shared with you, but just by modeling some of the resilience skills, just in doing that allows us to grow and become resilient individuals. So I wanted to share 7 C's to building resilience. This comes from expert parent advisor and psychologist Dr. Michelle Borba, as well as Fostering Resilience. It's a great website. I really encourage you all to go there and learn a little bit more about these 7 C's. The first one, encouraging competence. And competence is the ability to handle situations effectively. So children become competent by developing skills that allow them to trust their judgment and to make responsible choices. And we know for kids, that doesn't always come naturally. We have to really build that with children. When we highlight what young people are doing really well, but also give them opportunities to acquire new skills, they feel competent in those situations. We undermine competence when we prevent young children or young people from trying something new. So discouraging them from engaging in some kind of new activity, we undermine that competence. So it's important to allow them those opportunities to do something new and to discover a new strength for them. And things like even recovering from a fall, allowing them to do that on their own builds that competence and encourages them to be competent. Secondly, creating confidence with children. Competence and confidence go really well together. Confidence is the solid belief in one's own abilities. And it's not built by telling children that they're special or precious, but rather children gain confidence as they demonstrate their competence. So when they have that competence, then they continue to develop confidence in themselves in those different situations. When caregivers and other professionals that work with children, when they support children in developing competence, then kids believe that they can deal with different challenges and gain the confidence to try new things. So like I said, competence and confidence really go hand in hand, and they start to trust their ability to make sound choices. So it's important. I'm a parent, and a lot of times I want to swoop in and help my children when they've fallen down. My kids have recently taken up skateboarding, and so I'm a nervous wreck sometimes because I'm always worried that they're going to fall. But I am trying really hard to allow them to, when they fall down, to pick themselves back up again and to try it again and not give up, so that they can develop that competence and confidence that helps them to be resilient. So next, being a connector. Children with close ties to family, friends, school, the larger community around them, they're more likely to have a solid sense of security. And we all know that sense of belonging, when you step into, a friend group or a community, you feel that sense of belonging, that sense of security. That's really, really important. And it produces strong values and prevents children from seeking destructive alternatives. So again, when they feel like they have those close ties, they're less likely to engage in activities that would be dangerous and destructive for them. Family is obviously the central force in any child's life, but connections to, as I saw you guys mention in the chat, so things like Boys and Girls Club, religious organizations, athletic groups, civic organizations, those can also increase a child's sense of belonging to a broader world, that wider world, and to feel that sense of safety and security within those environments. It also allows them to have others to turn to when they have tough situations going on. Whether it's at school or whether it's at home, they have other groups to connect with. Fourth on building resilience is to build character. We know every family has its own idea of what constitutes good character. We have our own values, we have our own morals, and whatever the specifics are, children really need a fundamental sense of what is right and what is wrong to ensure that they're prepared to contribute to the broader world and become stable adults. So this is really what character is, that they have a good sense of the world around them when they know right from wrong, when they know what things have a lot of value, and what the moral beliefs are of their family. That helps them have expectations and to develop their character within that broader setting. And it helps children become comfortable sticking to their own values and standing up for themselves when someone is maybe threatening those values. They feel more comfortable if it's if they have a strong sense of that character development, and demonstrating a caring attitude towards others. So it's important that as we're building that character, recognizing that others may have different values, and it's important to respect and be positive around other people's character development. So that is a really important piece as children are growing up, to learn those differences with each other. Next, developing opportunities for contribution. So it's really powerful when children realize that the world is a better place because they are a part of it, because they are in it. When you feel like you are making a difference in the world, that gives us confidence and competence in being a part of something greater. They gain a sense of purpose by seeing the importance of the things that they're contributing to the world. And this can motivate them to take action to improve whether it's their family or their neighborhood or the community surrounding them. And they also learn that contributing to something greater feels really good. So I know my children, when the pandemic first started, they were watching a show that John Krasinski put together. He's from The Office, and it was called Some Good News, and it was sharing how people were contributing, even though we were all experiencing this horrible situation. You know, they were highlighting different individuals, definitely the healthcare workers, but other individuals in the community that were contributing. And that was something that was really positive for my kids, to see others contributing during a really tough time. And they felt like it, in turn, they wanted to then contribute to our smaller community. And so, you know, we brought meals for neighbors if they were sick. We tried to figure out what we could do within our smaller community so that they were contributing. And that this sense of contribution is driven by a sense of commitment and responsibility, not from pity. So it's really important to make that distinction that, you know, it's our responsibility, it's our commitment as a part of this broader community that we want to contribute, not out of pity. And this may help kids feel more comfortable turning to others for assistance when they need support and they need help, without feeling that sense of shame. So knowing who to turn to when you need help, that's one of the protective factors, can help them not feel that shame because they've contributed to others. The sixth C of resilience is to teach coping strategies. And this is a really big one that a lot of schools are implementing, different coping strategies for children. Children who learn to cope with stress effectively are better prepared to overcome life's challenges, whatever they may be. Kids who can distinguish between a crisis and a relatively minor setback can avoid, unnecessary anxiety that they might have. They can identify, okay, this is something fairly simple that I can get over, or this is a crisis situation and I need to seek help to get over this. And having a wide array of positive, adaptive coping mechanisms can help kids steer clear of dangerous quick fixes. So of course, adolescents acting out, adolescents using drugs or alcohol, obviously is one of those dangerous quick fixes that they might turn to. But when they have positive, healthy coping mechanisms that we have taught them as adults with our relationships, they're able to overcome different crises. So strategies like exercising, again, giving back, contributing, practicing relaxation techniques. There is a great website called Mind Yeti that teaches young children how to meditate. And it's a good technique for them to just take a few moments to breathe, to do some meditation, and then that once they've practiced it, they can use those techniques when they are in a real crisis situation. Even things like journaling can be really helpful for children, identifying some of their stress symptoms. Oh, I start to breathe really heavy when I get stressed out. That helps me know that I need to take some deep breaths. I might need to make sure I've eaten something, drink some water, those kinds of things. And journaling can really help children identify when they are getting stressed out. So teaching these coping strategies are really helpful. I don't know about you all, but it has taken me into my adulthood to develop some good coping strategies and make sure I'm exercising on a regular basis and drinking lots of water and things like that. So we continue to learn these things over time. It takes a lot of practice. Okay, the last C is modeling control. When children's decisions affect their lives, they learn that they have control over a situation. They see that they can do what it takes to bounce back after challenges. They have that ability to manage their emotions. If parents make all the decisions, children may believe things happen to them rather than I have choices that I can make. So it's important to allow children to have some ability to have control over their circumstances. This does not mean allowing kids to do whatever they want, but it does mean that we give them choices that they can use. Do you want to clean your room now or after dinner? That gives them some control over their environment, over their situation. And, when children do not have that sense of control, they feel like they could be depressed, they can be upset if they don't have that sense of control. So that's really important. So this is just a little tidbit. I know that was a lot, but that's just a little tidbit on the 7 C's of resilience. And it's really important when we're talking about adverse childhood experiences that we're discussing those as well. All right, moving on. So nurturing relationships not only support children, but they're also really helpful for adults' health as well. Relationships can help us to cope with and recover from stressful situations. They improve our quality of life. When we have strong connections and supportive relationships in our lives, we feel better. We have better physical and mental health, and we even live longer, and believe it or not, we even feel richer. You may not actually be more rich, but you feel richer when you have lots of supportive relationships. And research has shown that when we have a friend at work or someone we can turn to at work, we tend to work harder. When we have a good relationship with our supervisor, we tend to stay longer at a job. So relationship building is really important for businesses. Being socially connected helps our brains to sharpen, and we have better cognition. So equally important for adults, just as it is for children. All right, we're going to show a quick video, and then I think we have another, some more discussion questions for y'all.
We all want to give our children what they need to grow to their full potential. And as parents, we play an important role in their development. But our parenting is affected by the supports and challenges in our lives, including experiences that cause what's known as toxic stress. Stress is called toxic when it doesn't let up, and there aren't supportive relationships to help us cope. That can make it hard to get through the day, let alone be the best caregivers we can be. The overwhelming burden of toxic stress can affect the health and well-being of adults. It can also affect the development of children in ways that can last a lifetime. Stress that puts us in a constant state of fight or flight can make it feel like we're always on edge, or like it's impossible to calm down. And these feelings can overload our ability to provide the supportive relationships that children need in order to thrive. Think of toxic stress as heavy cargo. Just as a truck can only haul so much weight before it stops moving forward, challenging life circumstances, like losing a job or not having a place to live, can weigh us down. And just as a truck can break down if it carries too much for too long, we too can wear down from being overburdened without the support we need. When toxic stress is related to things we can't control, like poverty, abuse, or racism, it can feel especially heavy to take on. But experiencing toxic stress doesn't have to determine who we are or how we act. And understanding how stress affects us can empower us to make change in our lives. There are things we can do to buffer ourselves and our children against the effects of even the most intense stress. Just as redistributing cargo from an overloaded truck can help it run again, supports and services, things like food pantries, job training programs, or even just talking with someone who cares, can help us focus on caring for ourselves and our children. And just as regular maintenance is required to keep a truck running, reliable access to community services can help us manage the load during challenging times. Reaching out to get support can be difficult. But things that might seem very small, like sitting and breathing deeply, playing I Spy with your child, or even sharing a walk or a snuggle, can make a difference. Over time, these small steps can build our resilience and our children's by strengthening the skills and relationships that help us cope. And our communities can build resilience too by providing services and opportunities that help all families thrive. Supports like these help build a strong foundation for developing brain architecture. So the earlier we can provide them, the better. But the brain is capable of change throughout life, and it's never too late for a tune-up. Coping with and healing from toxic stress takes a lot of effort and support. But we all need the help of others in difficult times. And building resilience and strength in our families and communities is one of the most important investments we can make as a society. In the end, it will help all of us become the parents that we want to be.
Okay, so I feel like that video is a great summary of how positive relationships and community support can really buffer toxic stress caused by trauma, which is the focus of the Connections Matter training, which I'm gonna share with you in just a moment.
We all want.
So there is good news. You know, we want to, of course, share the positive. Preventing ACEs could eliminate chronic conditions, health risk behaviors, and negative socioeconomic outcomes. And by creating healthy communities and focusing on primary prevention, so, you know, Jill's slide that she had the triangle and we want to get down to the bottom, we can reduce the risk for ACEs and mitigate the impact for those affected. So we developed a partnership with Prevent Child Abuse Georgia, Georgia Center for Child Advocacy, along with our friends at DFEC's Office of Prevention and Community Support, to pull together a initiative called Connections Matter Georgia. And this is really focusing on those, again, connections, building positive connections as primary prevention for adverse childhood experiences. Connections Matter is a community-based initiative that explores how the connections we make in our life profoundly impact our brain's ability to grow and our own individual abilities to cope and thrive. It builds awareness and sparks interest in communities to review policies and practices and assess how we can develop more trauma-informed organizations and trauma-informed communities. So I'm going to share just one example of those policies. It's called Handle with Care, and it's something that some organizations, I'm sorry, not organizations, but some counties are starting to implement in the state of Georgia. In other states, this has become some statewide legislation, and Georgia's not there yet, but we are going county by county to promote this policy work. So Handle with Care is something where communities come together when children have experienced any kind of trauma. It could be, witnessing violence, a drug raid in the home, domestic violence situation, a shooting in the neighborhood, anything like that. Police are trained to identify children at the scene, find out where they go to school or daycare, and send the school or agency a confidential email that simply says, handle child's name with care. And that's it. There's no other details. It does not violate any kind of HIPAA restrictions. And from there, the students, teachers, and counselors monitor the child's well-being, paying attention to any academic or mental health or behavioral needs. And if necessary, the school can implement some interventions. So it's just a great example of a community coming together and trying to mitigate the impact of trauma. And we talk a lot more about it in the Connections Matter training. So thinking of that, what are some innovative ways that your community is working together to prevent trauma or mitigate the impact of trauma? What are some things that you all are doing? Can you type it in the chat for me? Do you have maybe training going on in your community around adverse childhood experiences? Oh, great. So yeah, being a CASA and supporting the work of CASA is an excellent way to mitigate the impact of trauma. That's great. What are some other things?
If anyone's joining from a Resilient Georgia site that's implementing things, that would be awesome.
Yeah, there's some great work going on across the state through Resilient Georgia. Raising highly capable kids. I love it. Helps parents build resilience. Yay. Healthy Beginnings system of care for referrals for teachers at Sheltering Arms. Great. Organizations collaborating together. Yes, anytime organizations can work together to support children and families, works so much better. Great, we'll keep this coming as I take you through the last few slides. So Connections Matter ultimately strives to promote building more resilient, compassionate, and trauma-informed communities. So it's focused on three main areas: educating individuals on the topics of ACEs, trauma, we talk about brain development and resilience, and how all of those are connected, as well as helping individuals explore how ACEs impact brain development, and then show how caring and nurturing connections can serve as that primary buffer. So we hope that you will join one of our trainings. We have free Connections Matter trainings going on during the month of April for Child Abuse Prevention Month. And we would love for you all to participate in any of those, and then we'll continue to provide those opportunities for training months after as well. So it's all connected. Healthy brains and supportive relationships lead to a strong and healthy community. And that's really what we would like to see, all of those pieces connected. So thank you so much to our contributors, specifically, obviously our two agencies, Prevent Child Abuse Iowa, they are the developers of the Connections Matter program. As we mentioned before, DFAC's the Office of Prevention and Community Support for helping to support our efforts. Dr. Stan Sunu at Emory contributed some content as well.